Unraveling: The Portal to Horror. Based on real stories. Rain lashed the windows of her small Lower East Side apartment as Maya Fisher typed frantically, the blue glow of the screen illuminating her pale face in the darkness. It was 3 in the morning, but sleep was a luxury she had rarely allowed herself since Emily's disappearance. 15 years had passed, but the image of his 8-year-old sister disappearing in the middle of a Saturday afternoon at the mall remained as clear as a photograph. That night, like so many others, Maya browsed the darkest corners of the internet. Forums where people shared paranormal experiences that science couldn't explain. The rhythmic clicking of her nails on the keyboard stopped abruptly when her eyes caught a title that seemed to pulse on the screen. Elevator to Setalém, the dimension between floors. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine as she scrolled down the page, devouring reports from people who claimed to have discovered a specific sequence of floors that, when pressed in certain elevators in historic buildings, opened portals to a parallel reality. The descriptions were disturbingly consistent: endless corridors, arbitrary rules of survival, encounters with distorted versions of missing people. One post in particular caught his attention, dated just 3 days ago from a user named Eliza K74. I found the correct sequence for the Empire State. I'll test it tonight. I'll update as soon as I get back. There were no updates. The profile showed that Eliza KB74 had not logged in since then. Maya clicked on the user's post history and felt her heart skip a beat when she saw a blurry photo, posted weeks ago. A woman holding an old newspaper next to a child. The quality was terrible, but something about that child awakened a dormant memory in Maya. As the clock ticked 4 in the morning, Maya discovered more details about the mysterious sequence: 42610-5. Users reported that these numbers, when pressed in the correct order, transformed ordinary elevators into portals. Some theorized that certain ancient buildings served as anchors between dimensions, and the Empire State Building was mentioned repeatedly. With trembling fingers, Maya saved every detail in her paranormal investigation notebook. The same, one where she kept all the clues about Emily's disappearance. When he finally turned away from the computer, something in the corner of the screen caught his attention. A private message had just arrived. With no identifiable sender, it contained just one line. "She's been waiting for you for 15 years. But be careful, Maya. Some portals aren't meant to be opened." The blood ran cold in his veins. She had never mentioned Emily in any post, never revealed her real name on those forums. With trembling fingers, Maya closed her laptop and, for the first time in years, she felt something other than the pain of loss. She felt fear mixed with a terrible hope. Across the room, in the mirror on the dresser that had belonged to Emily, a shadow moved independently of hers. Maya's apartment reeked of marinara sauce and garlic as she poured a 5th glass of cheap wine for Jen, who shook her head with her usual skepticism. The small living room was crowded. Alex set up his DSLR camera on a tripod in the corner, eternally, searching for material for his next documentary. Lucas gestured excitedly as he talked about the latest conspiracy theories circulating online. And Danny, the quietest of the group, sketched absent-mindedly in her sketchbook, her eyes occasionally darting to the shadows in the corners of the room. "So you're really suggesting that there is a magical elevator in the Empire State Building that takes people to a parallel dimension?" Jen laughed, adjusting her thick-rimmed glasses. "Maya, you're a psychology student. You should know delusions when you see them." The comment provoked laughter, but Maya's smile didn't reach her eyes. She had spent the entire day researching more about Setalém, and the more she read, the more bizarre connections she found with Emily's disappearance. "My Uncle Mike has worked security there for almost 20 years, Lucas interrupted, his voice slightly altered by the alcohol. "He told me some strange stories about that place. Elevators that stop on the wrong floors, visitors who swear they saw hallways that don't exist the next day." He lowered his voice dramatically. "And there was that time, about 3 months ago, when he was stuck in an elevator between the 10th and 12th floors. He said that when the doors finally opened, he saw a hallway that didn't belong to the building, with yellowish wallpaper that doesn't exist on any floor. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine. "And what happened next?" he asked, leaning forward. Lucas shrugged. He said the doors closed before he could investigate, but after that he started acting strange, more reserved. He got an unexpected promotion too. He took a sip of wine, his eyes fixed on Maya. "Funny that you should mention this Setalém thing now. I haven't been able to talk to him properly for almost 2 weeks." As the conversation continued, Danny lifted her notebook, revealing a disturbing drawing of an elevator with elongated, distorted figures watching from outside. "I've been having weird dreams all week," she murmured, "about elevators and hallways that never end. Something about the precision of the drawing made everyone momentarily silence. The figures in the drawing had vaguely familiar features. One of them vaguely resembled Maya's sister. What if we tested it?" Alex suddenly suggested, his gaze shining with the possibility of content for his channel. "Halloween is in 2 weeks. We really need an adventure, even if just to prove that it's all nonsense." He looked at Lucas. "Do you think your uncle could let us in after visiting hours?" As they debated the idea, neither of them noticed the strange synchronicity with which the apartment's lights flashed. Exactly 5 times, the moment they agreed to visit the Empire State Building on Halloween. And no one except Maya noticed that in the last group photo Alex took that night, there was a 6th person blurred in the background, a small figure who looked like an 8-year-old. The last bottle of wine was emptied as the night wore on. The apartment, once filled with skeptical laughter, now vibrated with the energy of a plan being formed. In a theatrical gesture, Alex placed his camera in the center of the coffee table and pressed the record button. "Let the record be known," he declared with mock solemnity, "that on this night of October 17th, the fearless urban explorers of the Lower East Side make a solemn pact. On Halloween night, we will unlock the mysteries of the elevator to Setalém." Maya felt an inexplicable chill when she heard the words spoken out loud, as if the simple act of verbalizing the intention had sealed something irreversible. "We're going to document everything," she insisted, looking directly into the camera. "Every detail from the moment we hit the sequence until—" She hesitated, unable to articulate what might come next. "Until the moment we prove it's all bullshit," Jen added, rolling her eyes as she raised her glass in an ironic toast. "To science and the debunking of yet another urban legend." Lucas, who was playing on his cell phone, raised his head with an expression of triumph. "I just exchanged messages with my uncle. He's different, short, strange answers. But he said I can get the employee access card key from his apartment drawer if he's not there when I come to visit." His face showed a mixture of excitement and concern. "He's never offered this to me before. It's like he wants us to go." Danny, who had been silent for some time, suddenly closed her sketchbook tightly, making everyone startle. "I don't like this," he muttered, his eyes fixed on a point beyond the circle of friends. "There's something wrong with this whole thing. I can feel it." She had always been the most intuitive of the group, sensitive to energies that others ignored. After a few more minutes of planning, the group dispersed. Alex and Jen shared a cab to Brooklyn. Lucas went out to buy cigarettes at a 24-hour bodega, and Danny, still visibly distraught, retired to her room down the hall. Maya was alone in the room, organizing the empty bottles and dirty glasses, when her laptop, which had been on standby all night, spontaneously lit up. On the screen flashed the forum page she had been reading the night before, now with a new, private message that made her heart stop momentarily. "You guys just did exactly what they wanted. The sequence is an invitation, and you accepted. Emily tried to warn you in the mirrors, but you never looked properly. Now it's too late. They already know your names." Below the message was a photo that Maya was sure she had never seen before. 5 children in front of the Empire State Building, their faces blurred except for one. Emily, her missing sister, smiling directly at the camera, holding the hand of a woman whose face was completely distorted. When Maya was finally able to move, she ran to the apartment window, feeling like she was being watched. Across the street, in the flickering light of a streetlight, a lone figure stared directly into her window. A man who looked strangely familiar, with the same build and posture as Lucas's uncle, but when a taxi passed by, briefly illuminating. His face, Maya saw only a dark smudge where his eyes should have been. The days that followed the pact brought a sequence of disturbing events that none of the 5 friends could rationally explain. For Maya, it all started on a rainy Tuesday when she arrived home soaked after a psychopathology class. While drying, her hair in the small bathroom, her fingers accidentally touched a forgotten shoebox at the back of the cabinet under the sink. Inside, she found something that made her heart race. A stack of Polaroids of Emily that Maya didn't remember keeping there. The photos seemed normal at first glance. Emily playing in the park, Emily blowing out birthday candles, Emily in front of the Empire State Building during a school trip. It was only upon closer inspection that Maya noticed in each image a tall, blurry figure in the background, always in the same position, always watching, always a little closer in each photo. Alex woke up screaming every night, his body covered in cold sweat. The nightmare was always the same, him inside an elevator in free fall, descending eternally down a shaft that had no end. In the dream, the elevator mirrors reflected not his own face, but unknown faces that whispered numbers in sequence. When he woke up, he found his filming equipment turned on, the camera pointed at his bed, recording while he slept. The footage, when I watched it in the morning, always ended with static and 5 seconds of a blurry image of an empty hallway. For Jen, the most disturbing experience occurred during a structural engineering class. As the teacher explained voltage calculations in tall buildings, she looked at her notebook and saw that she had unconsciously written the same sequence of numbers over and over again. 4, 2, 6, 10 to 5. But it was as she passed a shop window on the way home that the real horror began. Her reflection remained still for a second after she continued walking, and smiled in a way that Jen never would. Lucas could no longer contact his uncle. His messages went unanswered, and his calls went straight to voicemail. Worried, he went to Mike's apartment in Queens, using the spare key he had always kept. The place was impeccably clean and organized. Strangely clean for a man Lucas had always known as disorganized. On the kitchen table, a calendar marked October 31st in red ink, and next to it, a yellowed newspaper clipping reported the unexplained disappearance of 5 young people in the Empire State Building in 1974. When Lucas looked closer, he recognized, with horror, that one of the faces in the old photos looked disturbingly like Maya. But it was Danny who underwent the most visible transformation. The young artist, always calm and centered, developed a paralyzing fear of enclosed spaces. During a drawing class, she had a panic attack when entering the elevator at the art college. Over the next few days, he began compulsively drawing the same scene over and over again. 5 figures holding hands forming a circle around a 6th person, a child, inside an elevator whose panel showed an unnumbered button glowing red. Her therapist suggested that they were manifestations of anxiety, but Danny knew it was something more. Something was trying to communicate through her drawings, warning of what awaited them. The night before the night they were to test the legend, the 5 friends gathered again at Maya's apartment, each reluctant to share their disturbing experiences for fear of appearing crazy in the eyes of others. The tension was palpable. It was Alex who finally broke the silence, placing his camera on the table. "I've been recording strange things happening in my apartment," he confessed, his normally confident voice now reduced to a whisper. Shadows moving when there's no one there. One by one, they began to reveal their own experiences, each story more unsettling than the last, the coincidences piling up in a way that was impossible to ignore. As they talked, none of them noticed the small figure that briefly appeared in the 4th floor window, the figure of a child who watched the group with dull, empty eyes, her tiny fingers tracing the sequence 4, 2, 6, 10, 5 on the glass fogged by cold breath. In the room's mirror, another figure watched silently, a man in a security uniform whose badge identified him as Mike Sullivan, but whose face was just a featureless dark blur, save for a smile that stretched too wide to be human. The night before Halloween arrived with an unexpectedly violent storm that seemed focused only on the block where Maya lived. The five friends gathered one last time to finalize the details of the plan. The apartment lit only by candles after a power cut that only affected their building. Shadows danced on the walls like silent spectators of an ancient conspiracy. Lucas arrived last, soaked and visibly upset, carrying a small metal box that he placed in the center of the table. "I found this in my uncle's apartment," he explained, his voice shaking slightly as he opened the box. Inside was an Empire State Building access card key, a small notebook with torn-out pages, and an old yellowed photograph showing a group of security guards in front of the building, dated 1974. His apartment looked different. There were strange symbols drawn on the bathroom walls with something that looked like... Lucas hesitated, swallowing hard. "Blood. Did you manage to speak to him?" asked Maya, leaning over to examine the contents of the box. Lucas shook his head. "No, and there's something stranger." He pointed to the photograph. "That's my uncle, Mike." Everyone leaned in to see the image Lucas was pointing to, a collective shiver running through the group. It was impossible. The photo was from 1974, but there was a man identical to Lucas's uncle, without having aged a day. Danny, who had been silent in the corner of the room, suddenly let out a muffled scream. A small object slipped out of his backpack and fell to the floor with a soft thud. A perfectly folded origami elevator. "That's not mine," she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "I swear it wasn't in my backpack when I left the house." Alex cautiously took the origami, unfolding it slowly. Inside, written in childish handwriting, were the words, "To come back, someone has to stay. This is the rule. This has always been the rule." Below the message, a careful drawing of an elevator panel with the sequence 4, 2, 6, 10, 5 circled in red. "Won't," Danny declared, suddenly standing up. "This isn't a joke or an adventure. There's something really wrong going on." His voice trembled, but his eyes conveyed absolute certainty. "I've been dreaming about endless hallways and randomly numbered rooms. Last night," she hesitated, "I dreamed that I was in the Empire State Building, and when the elevator stopped, on the 11th floor I saw all of you going into different rooms, but none of you were coming out." "There is no 11th floor in the Empire State Building," Jen interrupted, her usual skepticism now tinged with a tinge of despair. "The sequence of floors goes from the 10th straight to the 12th, out of superstition." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed this information. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine when she remembered a detail from the forum reports. Setalém existed in the spaces between, in places that shouldn't exist within normal reality. While they were arguing, Maya walked away to use the bathroom. When she turned on the light, her breath froze. On the mirror, written in the same red lipstick Emily wore the day she disappeared, was the sequence 4, 2, 6, 10, 5, dripping like fresh blood. Maya tried to scream, but no sound came out. In the reflection behind her, she saw an 8-year-old girl wearing a dress she instantly recognized. When he turned around, the bathroom was empty. When she returned to the room, shaky and pale, she found her friends at an impasse. Danny was determined not to go, while Alex insisted they had come too far to give up. Lucas seemed lost in his own thoughts, obsessively examining his uncle's photograph. Jen, ever the voice of reason, proposed a pragmatic solution. They would go to the Empire State Building, but if anything seemed out of the ordinary, they would abandon the plan immediately. What none of them realized was that their decisions no longer mattered. On the coffee table, the elevator origami now showed wet spots that slowly expanded, forming the silhouette of 5 human figures. And on Maya's cell phone, an anonymous message had just arrived. "You think you're going to test a legend, but the truth is you're coming home. She's missed you, Maya, all these years." Halloween night enveloped Manhattan in a supernatural embrace. The streets were teeming with people in costumes. but the group of 5 friends who met at the corner of 33rd and 5th Avenue were not wearing any costumes. Their tense faces and apprehensive looks were masks enough for the journey they were about to undertake. Maya felt her heart hammer against her chest as she watched the imposing structure of the Empire State Building rise above them, its lights cutting through the fog that had inexplicably descended just around the building. "We'll use the service entrance on the east side," Lucas instructed, his voice strangely monotone, as if reciting rehearsed words. Her normally lively eyes seemed dull in the streetlights. "Mike said the cameras in Sector B have been undergoing maintenance for 2 weeks." No one questioned how Lucas knew this, considering he had claimed he hadn't been able to contact his uncle for days. The group followed in silence, weaving through the festive crowd and around the building to an inconspicuous metal door, partially hidden by a stack of delivery crates. The card key worked at the first touch, emitting a soft beep and a metallic click that seemed to echo too much in the empty alley. The door opened to reveal a dimly lit service hallway, surprisingly quiet for one of New York's busiest buildings on the busiest night of the year. "Shouldn't there be security guards?" Jen whispered, her skepticism now replaced by visceral apprehension. "That seems too easy." Alex turned on his camera, the little red LED blinking like a watchful eye in the dim light. "Maybe they're all at the Halloween party I saw advertised in the main lobby," he offered, adjusting his focus. But his voice betrayed the same uneasiness they all felt. Something was deeply wrong with the ease with which they had entered. As they moved down the corridor, they passed the security office, a glass-walled room that was supposed to house at least 2 guards, now completely empty. Monitors flashed showing different areas of the building, but they all seemed deserted. On the main table, a coat was neatly folded with an identification badge facing up. Without the others noticing, Lucas walked over and took the badge, his fingers shaking. "That's..." His voice trailed off. "That's supposed to be my uncle's badge, but the photo isn't him." The group gathered around him, noting the identification that showed the name, Michael Sullivan, Chief Security. But the face in the photograph was that of a completely different man, older with deep-set eyes and an expression of intense sadness. Most disturbing, however, was the date of issue, October 17th, 1974, the same night that, 50 years earlier, they had made their pact. "That doesn't make sense," Maya muttered, feeling her head throbbing. "How can this badge be your uncle's but with someone else and issued half a century ago?" A distant metallic sound interrupted the discussion, the unmistakable bell of an elevator arriving at its destination. The 5 friends froze, exchanging looks of silent panic. "No one should be in this area," Lucas whispered. Mike said this section would be completely empty. Driven by a curiosity that overcame fear, they followed the sound to a side corridor that ended in an old elevator, different from the modern ones that served tourists. This one had brass pantograph doors and an interior panel reminiscent of the 70s. The strangest thing, however, was that the elevator was stopped with the doors open, as if inviting them to enter. Inside, mirrors lined every wall, creating a disorienting, infinite effect. "This is it," Maya stated with a certainty she couldn't explain. "This is the elevator to Setalém." As he spoke, he took out of his pocket the small notebook where he had written down all the details of the urban legend. "According to reports, we all need to go in together and press the specific sequence, 42610-5. Danny, who had been exceptionally silent, suddenly grabbed Maya's arm. "There's something in the mirrors," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something moving independently of us." Everyone looked at the mirrored interior of the elevator, and for a fleeting moment, Maya had the impression that the reflections didn't exactly correspond to their movements, as if their reflections were a second behind, or perhaps a second ahead. Alex entered first, camera raised, capturing everything. "History first, fear second," he declared with forced confidence. The others followed him hesitantly. When the last of them, Lucas, crossed the threshold, the doors closed softly behind the group without anyone pressing any buttons. So, the mirrors that surrounded them, Each saw not only their own reflection, but also undefined shadows standing behind them, visible only in the reflection, invisible when they turned to look. And in each of the mirrors, the reflection of a small child's hand appeared briefly, pointing to the control panel, where the numbers waited to be pressed in the fateful sequence. The inside of the elevator seemed to exist in its own bubble of reality. The sound of the party city outside completely muted, replaced by a barely perceptible electric hum that seemed to emanate from the walls. Maya and the others squeezed into the confined space, their tense bodies creating a constellation of infinite reflections in the mirrors that surrounded them. Alex kept the camera on, the little digital eye witnessing every movement as Maya approached the old control panel. With buttons yellowed with age, "Let's go over this one last time," Jen said, her voice betraying an unusual tremor for someone normally so rational. "We do the 4-2-6-10-5 sequence, and if nothing happens, which is most likely, we go home, drink until we forget all this madness, and never talk about it again." Nobody responded. The air inside the elevator felt thick, almost suffocating, charged with an electricity that made the hairs on everyone's arms stand up. With a nod to her friends, Maya began pressing the buttons. First 4, the buttons sank in with an unnaturally loud click, and the lights flashed momentarily. Then 2, this time, the elevator emitted a metallic groan, as if waking up from a long sleep. The 6, a subtle tremor ran through the ground beneath his feet. 10, the mirrors seemed to ripple for an instant, like the surface of a lake disturbed by a stone. And finally, 5, the button sank completely, locking in the pressed position. "Nothing happened," I said. Jen began with a sigh that mixed relief and disappointment. Urban legends are just that, legends. Frustrated and vaguely embarrassed by their own fear, they began randomly pressing buttons, trying to make the elevator move to any floor. Lucas, particularly agitated, repeatedly pressed the emergency button, which remained inert beneath his fingers. "That's ridiculous," he muttered. "We can't even get out of here now. This damn thing is locked down." It was at that moment that the lights completely failed. The total darkness lasted only 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which no one breathed, no one moved, and everyone felt something cold and intangible pass through them, like a draft where there should be none. When the lights came back on, they were different, dimmer, with a yellowish tint that hadn't been present before, pulsing in a rhythm that vaguely resembled breathing. Maya was the first to notice. The mirrors. Her voice trailed off as she pointed to the reflective surfaces around them. Each mirror now showed slightly different versions of each other, versions whose movements didn't exactly match their own. Alex's reflection smiled when the real Alex was serious. Jen's reflection had slightly darker eyes, almost completely black. Danny's reflection looked older, with gray streaks in her hair. Lucas's reflection wore a security uniform identical to his uncle's, and Maya's reflection was holding hands with a small child who wasn't present in the elevator. A child Maya instantly recognized as Emily. A violent jolt shook the elevator, making everyone lose their balance. The sensation was not of falling or rising, but of lateral movement, as if the elevator was moving horizontally, something physically impossible. The buzzing increased in volume, becoming almost deafening, causing Maya to cover her ears. And then, as abruptly as it began, the noise stopped and the elevator stopped. On the control panel, a subtle but impossible change had occurred. Between the buttons for floors 10 and 12, there was now a new button that wasn't there before. The button for floor 11, glowing with a reddish light that none of the other buttons emitted. Maya knew the Empire State Building well enough to know that, like many old buildings in New York, it did not have an 11th floor. The numbering jumped from 10 directly to 12, a common architectural superstition. "That's not possible," muttered Jen, her skepticism finally giving way to terror at the impossible. "That button, that floor doesn't exist." Maya felt a shiver run down her spine as the air around her suddenly grew cold, her breath forming small clouds of condensation. In the mirror directly in front of her, Emily's reflection smiled. Not the innocent smile of a child, but something older, more knowing, something that didn't belong on the face of an 8-year-old girl. His lips moved, forming silent words that only Maya could see. "Now press 11. It's time to go home, Maya. We're all waiting for you." Alex's finger, driven by a curiosity that overcame fear, was already approaching the non-existent button. "Let's find out what's on the 11th floor," he said, his voice strangely calm, almost hypnotized. None of the others had time to stop him before his finger pressed the red button, sealing everyone's fate. The elevator rose slowly, emitting a metallic groan that sounded more like a whine. The digital display above the door flashed between random numbers before finally settling on 11. The steady hum that had accompanied them gradually faded into a low hiss, like distant radio static between stations. As the elevator slowed, Maya felt increasing pressure in her ears, as if they were ascending to an altitude much higher than just one floor. "Do you smell that?" whispered Danny, her face contorted into an expression of disgust. A strange odor filled the elevator, a combination of old mold, dust accumulated over decades, and something metallic that vaguely resembled blood. Before anyone could respond, the doors slid open smoothly, revealing a sight that defied everything they believed possible. Before them stretched a corridor that could not exist inside the Empire State Building, a hotel corridor that seemed to stretch infinitely in both directions, lit by fluorescent lights that flickered in an arrhythmic rhythm. The yellowed wallpaper, with a geometric pattern typical of the 70s, was peeling in places, revealing previous layers like dead skin being sloughed off. The faded red carpet showed dark stains and patterns that suggested vaguely human shapes. Numbered doors lined both sides of the hallway, but the numbers followed no logical sequence. 1974, 453, 86, 31070, arranged in an order that seemed deliberately designed to disorient. "That's impossible," Jen murmured, her voice barely audible. "The Empire State has a rectangular floor plan. This corridor runs in a straight line beyond what would be the outer perimeter of the building." Alex, mesmerized by the discovery, stepped out of the elevator, his camera raised to capture the impossible architecture. "This is incredible," he whispered, his voice mixing fear and awe. "We are really in Setalém." "Don't get out of the elevator," Maya shouted, suddenly remembering the warnings she read on the forum. One of the most repeated rules was to never leave the elevator. But the warning came too late. Alex was already 5 steps ahead, as if pulled by an invisible force. The elevator doors began to close automatically, a quick and decisive movement that contradicted the slowness with which they had opened. Lucas stretched out his arm, trying to block the doors, but they continued to close relentlessly, as if they had a mind of their own. "Get out!" shouted Danny, pushing her friends out as the doors approached. In a desperate move, the remaining 4 leaped into the hallway, the doors closing with a metallic clang behind them. The panel next to the elevator, which should have allowed him to be called again, was completely empty. No buttons, no indicators, just a polished metal plate that reflected their terrified expressions, now trapped in a place that defied all laws of physics. "What do we do now?" Lucas asked, his shaky voice revealing the fear he was trying to hide. No one responded immediately. The silence in the hallway was absolute, except for the intermittent hum of lights and a distant dripping sound, like a poorly turned-off tap, somewhere unseen. It was Alex who finally broke the silence. "We have to explore," he declared, his documentary filmmaker's instinct temporarily overcoming his terror. "If there is an entrance, there must be an exit." Reluctantly, the group began to walk down the hallway, keeping close to each other. The numbered doors they passed remained firmly closed despite attempts to open them. Maya noticed something disturbing. The further they went, the longer the corridor seemed to stretch. It was as if they were walking on an invisible treadmill, always getting nowhere. As they turned a corner that shouldn't exist in that corridor pattern, the group stopped abruptly. About 30 meters ahead, a lone figure stood with her back to them. A woman in a faded gray dress, her gray hair tied into a severe bun. She remained perfectly still, like a statue, but something about her posture suggested conscious waiting, as if she knew they were there. "Hello?" called Jen, her voice echoing strangely in the hallway as if it crossed a distance much greater than the few meters that separated them from the woman. Slowly, with a fluid movement that seemed almost unhuman in its precision, the woman partially turned, revealing only half of her face, a face wrinkled with age, with an ice-blue eye that seemed to glow with a light of its own. His lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his gaze. "Are you here to stay this time?" she asked, her voice too young for her aged body, echoing as if speaking through a tunnel. Maya felt her heart freeze. That voice, although more mature, was unmistakably similar to Emily's, an impossible adult version of a sister who disappeared at the age of 8. Before anyone could respond, the woman turned again and opened a door, room 1974, quickly entering and leaving it ajar, like a silent invitation that neither of them were sure they should accept. The group remained motionless, staring at the half-open door of room 1974. The number, engraved in oxidized brass, seemed to pulse subtly in the flickering light of the hallway. Danny grabbed Maya's arm hard enough to leave marks, her nails digging into the skin, as if trying to anchor herself to the reality that was quickly dissolving around them. "That voice," Maya whispered, her throat so dry that the words came out as a painful rasp. She sounded like Emily, but older, like Emily would sound if she had grown up. The idea was absurd and terrifying in equal measure. Her sister had disappeared 15 years ago when she was just 8. If she were alive, she would be 23 now, not the advanced age of the woman they just saw. "This is impossible," Jen repeated, like a mantra that lost potency with each new impossibility they witnessed. "People don't just disappear and reappear decades older. There has to be a rational explanation for this." Alex, who had remained strangely silent, suddenly advanced toward the half-open door, his camera raised like a shield. "There's only one way to find out," he declared, adrenaline visibly overpowering his fear. Lucas tried to grab his arm, but Alex freed himself with a sudden movement. "Don't you see? That's what we came for. Answers, proof, the truth behind this urban legend." "Alex, wait," Maya called. But he was already halfway to door 1974, moving with an almost hypnotic determination. The others looked at each other briefly before following behind him, not out of courage, but out of the greater terror of being separated in that impossible place. As they approached the door, they heard a sound coming from inside the room, the creak of an old record player playing a distorted melody that Maya recognized instantly, the lullaby her mother used to sing to Emily. An unthinkable coincidence that sent waves of icy terror down her spine. Alex pushed the door wide open, revealing a hotel room perfectly preserved in its 1970s aesthetic. A king-size bed with an orange and brown bedspread, an old-fashioned tube television, a macrame shade lamp, and a dark wooden desk on which dozens of yellowed newspapers were neatly stacked. The woman in gray sat in an armchair in the corner, her face now almost completely in shadow, only her eyes reflecting the dim light. "Took longer this time," she said, her voice now clearer, the unearthly echo gone. "Others usually follow the pattern more precisely. Pattern is important in Setalém." "Who are you?" Maya asked, stepping forward, a courage born of desperation, for answers driving her. "And why does your voice sound like my sister's?" The woman tilted her head slightly, like a curious bird studying something unexpected. "Interesting. A new question." She stood up with a movement too fluid for someone of her apparent age. "I'm not your sister, Maya Fisher. I'm Eliza Keating. Or I was when it still mattered." She gestured vaguely at the newspapers. 50 years. In your time, much more in Setalém's time." Lucas approached the stack of newspapers, picking up the one on top. The front page showed a news item dated October 1974. 5 young people mysteriously disappear at Empire State Building. Below the title, 5 black and white photographs showed the smiling faces of college students. 3 women and 2 men. One of the women was unmistakably a younger version of Eliza. "You tested the elevator legend," Alex muttered, not as a question, but as a horrified realization. Eliza smiled, a gesture that seemed rehearsed, as if she had forgotten what a smile was supposed to express. Just like you guys. Just like so many others over the years. She moved to a dresser and opened the top drawer, pulling out a worn, leather-bound journal. I kept records, at first so I wouldn't go crazy, then to understand the rules, and finally, to help those who came after. She handed the diary to Maya, who opened it with trembling fingers. The first few pages were filled with clean, orderly handwriting, detailing how Eliza and her friends had discovered the legend of the elevator and decided to test it on Halloween 1974. As Maya turned the pages, the handwriting became progressively more chaotic, the entries more disturbing, filled with mentions of watchers who hid in the reflections and how they feed off the fear of visitors. The watchers? Jen asked, reading over Maya's shoulder. Eliza walked to a mirror hanging on the wall and touched its surface with her fingertips. They are the true inhabitants of Setalém. They use the elevators as portals, attracting people whose minds can feed them. When you look into a mirror here, it is not your reflection you see, it is one of them, watching you, learning to imitate you. She turned to face them, her face now fully visible in the light. One side perfectly human, the other slightly distorted like a mask of melted wax. The longer you stay, the more they take from you, until... His voice trailed off, and for an instant his entire body seemed to tremble, like a television image with poor reception. When he stabilized again, his gaze was fixed on Maya with a disturbing intensity. Your sister is here, Maya. She's been here for 15 years, or what's left of her. Eliza pointed to the last page of the diary, where a single sentence was written, in large, irregular letters. To leave, someone must stay. A sharp, piercing sound, like metal being twisted, suddenly filled the air, causing everyone to cover their ears in agony. The entire room shook violently, and the lights flickered several times before stabilizing again. When they looked at the door, they discovered to their horror that it had completely disappeared. Where there had once been an exit, there was now just a solid wall covered in the same yellowish wallpaper. They were trapped in room 1974, and in the mirrors around them, their reflections smiled at them with smiles that weren't theirs. A sepulchral silence dominated the room after the discovery of the missing door. The immediate claustrophobia that gripped the group was palpable, each processing the terror of the situation in their own way. Jen was frantically examining the wall where the door had been, banging and pressing in search of some hidden mechanism. Lucas remained paralyzed, eyes fixed on the scattered newspapers. Danny had huddled in a corner, hugging her knees, and Alex, in a surprising moment of lucidity, had turned off the camera, as if he somehow felt that whatever was happening shouldn't be documented. This always happens, Eliza explained with disturbing calm, like a tour guide describing a local attraction. Setalém constantly reconfigures its architecture. Corridors change, doors disappear, new paths emerge. It's like a living organism responding to its occupants. She moved to a small round table in the center of the room, where an antique tea set was arranged, the porcelain cups decorated with a pattern of stylized eyes that seemed to follow everyone's movements. Do you want tea? It helps calm your nerves. Although I must warn you, nothing that looks like water in Setalém is really water. Maya ignored the macabre offer, her attention completely absorbed by Eliza's diary. He continued flipping through, the pages coming to entries that described in disturbing detail how each of Eliza's friends had disappeared one by one. One specific passage made his blood run cold. Day 17, I think. Now it's just Richard and I left. Yesterday we saw a child in the hallway, a girl of about 8 wearing a green dress. Richard ran after her, ignoring my cries to stop. When I found him 2 hours later, he was sitting on the hallway floor, staring at his own hand as if he'd never seen it before. His eyes were different. The pupils expanded until they almost eliminated the iris. He smiled at me and said, "She'll come back for you too, Eliza. She said she knows your sister." I never had a sister. A girl in a green dress. Maya murmured, looking up at Eliza. Emily was wearing a green dress when she disappeared. Eliza nodded slowly. Children are there. Messengers. The Watchers can't directly interact with our world, so they use vessels, especially children who were brought here. They retain more of their humanity for longer, are more convincing. She walked over to an antique dresser and opened the middle drawer, pulling out a framed photograph. This was here when I arrived, and new ones appear periodically. The photograph showed Emily, undoubtedly Emily, smiling alongside Eliza in front of the Empire State Building. The date printed in the corner read April 1973, a year before Eliza's documented disappearance, and more than 2 decades before Emily was born. That's impossible, Maya whispered, her fingers trembling as they touched the photograph's surface. How could she be in a photo with you before she was even born? Time in Setalém is not linear, Eliza explained, sitting on the bed and precisely smoothing the folds of her gray dress. Past, present, future. All these categories lose meaning here. Your sister is in all times of Setalém, as are all of us who have been absorbed by this place. Jen, who had finally given up on finding the missing door, approached the diary. What happened to your friends? That Richard guy you mentioned? Eliza's face briefly contorted into an expression of genuine pain. They have become part of Setalém. When you stay here long enough, you begin to lose pieces of yourself. Memories first, then emotions, then your humanity. In the end, you become one of them, a watcher. She pointed to the mirrors on the wall. That's why you shouldn't trust reflections here. It's never really you looking back. Lucas, who until then had been immersed in his own terrified silence, suddenly let out a muffled scream. He had opened one of the most recent newspapers in the pile, dated just 3 months ago. On the first page, a small note talked about the disappearance of a security guard at the Empire State Building, Michael Sullivan. My uncle, Lucas muttered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He didn't disappear recently. He ended up here months ago. And somehow, he's sending us messages from the other side. The sound of children's laughter suddenly echoed off the walls of the room, making everyone freeze. The lights flickered rhythmically, and the ground shook beneath their feet. Eliza looked up, a look of genuine alarm crossing her face for the first time. They know you discovered something important, she whispered urgently. Quickly, we have to move before... His words were interrupted by the deafening sound of walls moving. The wallpaper began to peel quickly, as if it were being burned by an invisible fire, revealing a smooth, dark surface beneath, covered in carved symbols that writhed as if they were alive. The entire room began to expand and contract, as if breathing. They're reconfiguring, Eliza shouted over the noise. Run to the bathroom, it's the only place they can't completely alter. The group rushed to the bathroom door as the room continued its terrifying metamorphosis. Maya, the last to enter, caught a glimpse of something that made her heart stop momentarily. Her own reflection in the main mirror, standing still as she ran, watching her with a smile that had never been on her own face. Next to the reflection was Emily, exactly as Maya remembered her, but her eyes were completely black, and when her lips moved, Maya could read the words even without hearing them. To leave. Someone has to stay. The bathroom door closed behind them with a metallic clang that reverberated like a funeral bell. The space was impossibly vast for a hotel bathroom. Polished marble floors stretched for several meters before reaching a row of mirrors and sinks that seemed to multiply infinitely under the fluorescent lights. The group huddled in the center of this anomalous space, breathless and disoriented, as Eliza quickly covered each reflective surface with towels she snatched from a nearby eye closet. Don't look at any reflections, she warned, her voice now carrying genuine urgency. That's how they track you. That's how they learn your weaknesses and fears. After covering the last mirror, she turned to the group. We have little time. When we leave here, we won't be able to return to this room. Setalém is already reconfiguring it. Where do we go then? Alex asked, his previous bravado completely evaporated. If there is no way out, there is an exit, interrupted Eliza, opening a small compartment hidden under the central sink. From inside, he removed what appeared to be a hand-drawn map on yellowed parchment. This place operates by its own rules, but they are still rules. If you understand them and follow them meticulously, you can find your way around. The 5 friends gathered around the map that Eliza unfolded. It didn't look like any normal architectural plan. Lines curved impossibly in on themselves. Corridors ended abruptly in strange symbols. And in the center was a detailed drawing of what appeared to be an ancient elevator, very different from the one that had brought them. "This is the original elevator," Eliza explained, pointing to the central drawing. "The first point of contact between our world and Setalém. It was built in 1931, during the construction of the Empire State Building. The architects didn't know what they were creating, or maybe they knew exactly." His finger traced a sinuous line from the center. "This is the way for him, but it never stays the same for long." A distant rumble made the ground shake beneath his feet. Small cracks began to form in the tiled walls, and one of the towels covering the mirrors fell away, momentarily revealing a surface that did not reflect the bathroom, but a completely different hallway where distorted figures moved in the dim light. "There's no more time," Eliza declared, tucking the map into Lucas's coat. "When we leave, the corridor will have changed. If we get separated, take the paths that seem wrong. In Setalém, normal human intuition is your worst enemy." With a quick movement, she opened a door at the other end of the bathroom, a door that Maya was sure wasn't there when they entered. On the other side, there were not one but 2 identical hallways, both stretching into darkness, lit only by red, emergency lights that pulsed like hearts. Without warning, a violent jolt caused the entire bathroom to tilt abruptly. Danny lost her balance, falling through the open door, with Lucas instinctively jumping to catch her. They both fell into the right hallway, just as a solid wall came down between the 2 hallways, instantly separating them from the rest of the group. "Lucas, Danny!" shouted Maya, running towards the newly formed barrier, striking it with her fists. There was no response, just the distant echo of what might have been a quickly silenced scream. "We need to keep going," Eliza insisted, pulling Maya, Alex, and Jen into the remaining hallway. "They will have to find their own way now. If they survive, we will meet at the original elevator." As they ran down the red corridor, Maya took her cell phone out of her pocket, trying to at least light the way ahead. To his surprise, the device turned on. Something that shouldn't be possible in this place disconnected from reality. Even more surprising was discovering that the camera worked. Pointing it at the corridor ahead as they ran, Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. The screen showed not only the empty corridor in front of them, but also tall, distorted figures standing at every corner, watching them. Figures that were completely invisible to the naked eye. "The Watchers," Eliza whispered as she noticed Maya's horrified expression. "Your camera captures them because electronic devices operate at frequencies that partially traverse the layers between realities. They are always there, watching, waiting for you to make a mistake." When they turned a corner, they found themselves in a circular hall with 7 identical doors. In the center of the room, a small pedestal held what appeared to be an ancient book. Eliza ran over to him, quickly leafing through the yellowed pages. "It's a nexus," she explained. "A decision point. Choose the wrong door, and you will be taken deeper into Setalém, to places from which there is no return." "How do we know which one is right?" Jen asked, her skepticism now replaced by pure pragmatic terror. Eliza continued leafing through the book, her fingers moving over incomprehensible symbols. "Everyone must choose their own path. That's how Setalém works, divide and conquer." "This is crazy," exclaimed Alex. "We can't be separated any further." A distant sound of metal being twisted echoed through the hall, followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps approaching down the corridors they had come from. Maya pointed her camera in the direction of the sound and let out a muffled scream. The screen showed dozens of approaching figures, some crawling along the walls, Like insects, others moving in unnatural spasms. "Choose now," ordered Eliza, closing the book tightly. "Or they will choose for you." In the panic of the moment, they each ran to a different door. Jen to the third one on the left, Alex to the one directly opposite the one they entered, and Maya, by some inexplicable impulse, to the one with the number 8 subtly carved into the wood, the number of Emily's age when she disappeared. As Maya walked through her door, she looked back one last time. Eliza stood in the center of the room, her body flickering like an interfering image, and for an instant, Maya saw through her, literally through, as if Eliza were partially translucent. The last thing she saw before the door closed was Eliza, smiling enigmatically as the distorted figures approached, and whispering words that Maya couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "Find Emily. She's the key." The door closed with a soft click, and Maya found herself alone in a hallway that seemed ripped straight from her most painful memories. The walls painted the same shade of yellow as the room Emily had occupied as a child, the floor covered in the same blue carpet as in her childhood home. Reality and memory merged in Setalém, and as she moved forward, Maya realized she was walking not just down an impossible corridor, but through layers of her own unprocessed trauma. On his cell phone, now his only connection to others, a text message appeared from an unknown number. "For every rule broken, one of you stays. The first rule is, never follow the child who smiles." The corridor where Lucas and Danny had been separated from the group stretched out like a concrete canyon, progressively swallowing them into darkness. The red emergency lights pulsed at increasingly longer intervals, as if the electricity itself was slowly dying in the thick, oppressive air. Lucas kept his arm firmly around Danny's shoulders, both to guide her and to reassure himself that he wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. "We need to find a way back to the others," Danny murmured, her voice small and fragile in the absolute silence of the hallway. There was none of the usual hum of ventilation systems or the distant rumble of human activity that usually fills even the emptiest spaces. The silence was so complete that their heartbeats seemed deafening in their own ears. After what seemed like hours of walking, the corridor abruptly widened, opening at a junction where 3 new paths presented themselves. On the central wall, among the possible choices, something caught Lucas's attention. A previously white surface now completely covered with messages scribbled in different calligraphy, using different materials. Pen, lipstick, dried blood, scratches made with nails. The sight was disturbing, as if dozens of desperate people had used their last moments of lucidity to register warnings for future prisoners of Setalém. "My God," Lucas whispered, approaching cautiously. "Their rules." Danny joined him, her wide eyes scanning the wall of warnings. Some messages looked recent, the ink still glowing under the red light. Others were faded with time, almost illegible. Together they began to read in low voices, as if they were sharing forbidden secrets. "Don't look back more than twice. By the third time, something will be watching you. Never enter rooms with your own birthday number. They are personalized traps. If you hear your name being called, don't respond. It's never who you think it is. Don't trust reflections. It's not you looking back. Water is not water, food is not food. Do not consume anything you find here. Children always lie. Adults are rarely adults. Mirrors are windows to them. Cover everyone you meet. Numbers have meaning. 7 is safe, 11 never is." And the most disturbing message, written in dark red in the center of the wall, "For every rule broken, one of you stays." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine as his brain processed the implications of these contradictory and cryptic instructions. He pulled out his cell phone, surprised to see that it still worked in this impossible place, and began methodically photographing each notice on the wall. If they managed to get out of there, this information could be vital to understanding what was happening and maybe even helping Uncle Mike. "That explains why Eliza survived so long," Danny commented, running her fingers lightly over a message that looked particularly old. "She learned the rules, adapted to this distorted reality. Lucas nodded, continuing to photograph. We need to memorize all of these. We don't know when we'll be close to a... What was that? A muffled sound reverberated through the hall, something between a human groan and the screech of twisting metal. They both froze, looking in the direction of the noise. The lights flickered more brightly for a moment, and in the brief pulses of darkness, something seemed to move in the shadows beyond. Lucas raised his cell phone, pointing the camera at the end of the hallway as he took another photo. When he looked at the screen to check the image, his blood ran cold in his veins. The photograph clearly showed a figure that was not visible to the naked eye. A man in a security uniform standing about 10 meters away, directly observing them. The face was unmistakable, despite the completely black eyes, without irises or pupils. His Uncle Mike. He's here, Lucas whispered, showing the photo to Danny. My uncle. But I can't see him, he's only in the photo. Danny studied the image, her face paling even more. Your eyes, he murmured. Eliza mentioned the Watchers. I think your uncle may have become one of them. A sudden and terrifying realization hit Danny. She looked at the list of rules again, her eyes settling on the warning about rooms with birthday numbers. Lucas, she said, her voice barely controlling the rising panic. My birthday is November. 11/11, Lucas repeated, horrible realization spreading across his face. They both looked simultaneously at the doors they had recently passed, remembering one in particular, door 1111, whose ordinary appearance had not raised any alarm when they passed it minutes ago. At that instant, the ground beneath his feet shook violently. Cracks formed in the linoleum floor, radiating in all directions like fast-growing spiderwebs. Danny let out a scream as the ground beneath her began to transform. It wasn't simply giving way, but liquefying, turning into a viscous substance that gripped her ankles with increasing strength. Luke! She screamed, reaching for him as she was pulled inexorably downwards. Lucas grabbed her arms, pulling with all his strength against the unearthly suction, but that only seemed to speed up the process. The harder he fought to save her, the faster Danny sank. Don't let go, please, she begged, her body already submerged up to her waist in the dark mass that had once been the solid floor. His eyes, wide with terror, suddenly focused on something behind Lucas. There's someone there, it's a girl. Lucas turned his head briefly, only seeing empty shadows. When he turned to Danny again, she was sunk up to her chest, her face screwed up in an expression of shock that was no longer just fear, but a strange understanding. I can see downstairs, she said, her voice taking on a distant, almost dreamy quality. There's a girl there. She's waving at me. His eyes met Lucas's one last time. It's Maya's sister. She says she knows how to get out of here. With one last violent tug, Danny submerged completely, her fingers slipping from Lucas's, leaving him kneeling before a once again solid floor, with no evidence of the horror he had just witnessed except for a small metallic object that hadn't been there before. An old brass elevator key, with the number 11 engraved on the head. Lucas took the key with trembling fingers, placing it in his jacket pocket. Tears streamed freely down his face as he staggered to his feet. The rules on the wall seemed to mock him now, especially the last one he had photographed moments before he lost Danny. Choices have consequences. Sacrifices are inevitable. His mind in shock, Lucas turned to flee the cursed place, only to find himself face to face with a figure that was now visible without the aid of the camera. His Uncle Mike, his uniform impeccable, his face a perfect mask of human sympathy, except for the completely black eyes that reflected no light. You broke a rule, nephew, said the thing that had once been Mike Sullivan, his voice a near-perfect simulation of human cordiality. But don't worry, she won't suffer for long. Horror paralyzed Lucas as he stared at the creature that wore his uncle's face. Despite his near-perfect appearance, there was something fundamentally wrong with the way he moved, as if every gesture was a studied imitation of human behavior, lacking the natural fluidity that comes from true life. The black eyes, completely empty of iris or pupil, stared at Lucas with a predatory intensity. "Uncle Mike?" Lucas whispered, his voice shaking. "What happened to you?" The creature tilted its head at a slightly unnatural angle, like a curious bird. "Mike Sullivan found the elevator 3 months ago," he replied in a voice that was both familiar and alien. "He broke so many rules. It was almost like he wanted to stay. And now, part of him is still here. With me. Just like part of O. Danny is now below." A tremor of anger passed through Lucas's body, momentarily overcoming his terror. "What did you do to her?" he shouted, taking a step forward. The thing that wore Mike's face smiled, a too wide smile that extended slightly beyond the limits of what a human face should allow. "Me, I didn't do anything. It was 7th Alum." He gestured to the surrounding hallway. "This place is hungry, nephew. Hunger for human experiences, for emotions, for memories. And your friend broke one of the oldest rules. Never go through a door that has your birth number on it." The weight of guilt fell on Lucas like an avalanche. They had passed through door 1111 without realizing its significance. If he had noticed, if he had paid more attention, maybe Danny would still be. "Don't blame yourself so much," said the creature, as if reading his thoughts. "It was inevitable. Someone always has to stay. That's how Setalém keeps its balance. For every person who leaves, someone else has to take their place." "You brought us here," Lucas accused, realization crystallizing in his mind. "He left the card key, sent those strange messages, lured us into this trap." The creature approached with perfectly silent steps, another wrong detail that sent shivers down Lucas's spine. "Yes and no. Mike wanted you to come, and I needed new experiences to feed me. A mutually beneficial arrangement." He stopped less than a meter from Lucas. "And you brought not just yourself, but 4 others. So generous." Lucas stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for the elevator key in his pocket. As she felt the cold metal, a memory sparked in her mind. Something Eliza had mentioned about an original elevator in the center of Setalém. If there was a way out, it would be there. "Where is Danny now?" he asked, trying to buy time as his eyes scanned the hallway for an escape route. "She is in transition," the creature replied, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. "When humans are absorbed by 7th Alum, they go through stages. First, denial and resistance, then understanding and resignation, finally, transformation." His black eyes shone with an impossible inner light. "Some become observers, like me. Others become messengers, like your friend Maya's sister. And some become part of the very architecture of Setalém, sustaining its structure with their memories and emotions." A terrible thought occurred to Lucas. "And my uncle? Is he still conscious in there?" The creature paused, as if considering the question. "Parts of it," he finally admitted. "Fragments of consciousness, specific memories that I found. Particularly tasty. His guilt for using you as bait, for example. That remorse tastes especially sweet." Anger and disgust mixed inside Lucas, forming a desperate determination. With a sudden movement, he darted to the left, running into one of the corridors that branched off from the junction. Behind him, the creature didn't scream or run. It simply smiled, that unnatural smile, confident that in Setalém, no matter where you ran, it was never truly moving away. Lucas ran until his lungs burned, turning corners randomly, passing through numbered doors with no apparent pattern. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, leaning against a wall, he realized he was in an entirely new hallway. The lights here weren't red, but a pale, cool blue that gave everything an underwater quality. As he tried to get his bearings, Lucas heard a distant sound, not footsteps or voices, but a mechanical hum that vaguely resembled a moving elevator. Following the sound, he turned another corner and stopped abruptly, his heart almost stopping at what he saw. At the end of the hallway was an elevator unlike any I'd ever seen, older, with a manual pantograph grate instead of automatic doors, and a panel of buttons that glowed with strange symbols instead of numbers. Before him, a familiar figure stood, Danny, her back to him, seemingly intact. "Danny?" Lucas called, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like you?" She turned around slowly. It was Danny, her face, her body, her clothes. But something was deeply wrong. His eyes, once expressive and warm, now had the same empty black quality as those of the creature that wore his uncle's face. When he smiled, the gesture didn't reach those empty eyes. "I found the way out," she said, in a voice that was almost, but not quite Danny's. "Come with me, Lucas, everyone's waiting downstairs." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. He remembered one of the rules. Children always lie. Adults are rarely adults. Whatever was before him wasn't Danny. It was something using her form, just as the creature in the hallway used his uncle's form. "You're not her," Lucas declared, taking a step back. "Danny is gone." The fake Danny tilted her head at the same unnatural angle as the previous creature. "Parts of her are gone," he agreed. "Other parts are still here, transforming. But I received a gift before I completely submerged." She held out her hand, revealing a small object that made Lucas's blood run cold, a pendant that Maya had given to each of them as a protective amulet earlier in the evening. "She wanted you to know something important." Against his better judgment, Lucas asked, "What?" The fake Danny's smile grew impossibly wide. "She saw Maya's sister. Emily has been in the lowest level of Bethlehem, collecting lost souls for 15 years, and she has a plan for all of you." The creature took a step towards the elevator. "Want to see her? I can take you there." Lucas felt the weight of the key in his pocket, remembering Eliza's words about the original elevator. This elevator in front of him was old, but something told him it wasn't the real way to the exit. It was another trap, another attempt by Setalém to capture yet another victim. "No, thank you," he replied, forcing firmness into his voice. "I'm going to find my friends, the real ones." The fake Danny's expression transformed, the mask of humanity slipping away to reveal something ancient and predatory beneath. "As you wish," he hissed in a voice that no longer tried to imitate Danny's. "But know this, for everyone that escapes, another must stay. You have already sacrificed your friend. Who will be next, Lucas Sullivan? Who will you leave behind?" Lucas turned and ran, the creature's laughter chasing him down the hallway. As he ran, he felt something in his pocket. Not just the key, but another object he was sure hadn't been there before. A small, worn-out notebook. Without stopping, he quickly took it out and glimpsed the first page, where a single line had been written in a handwriting he recognized as Danny's. "Find Maya. Emily is the key, but she's not Emily anymore. Nothing is what it seems in Setalém." Maya walked down the yellow hallway that evoked Emily's childhood bedroom, each step heavier than the last. The feeling of walking through a distorted version of his own memories was suffocating. On the walls, familiar photos appeared and disappeared, as if they were being projected by a faulty magic lantern, frozen moments of a life that had been torn apart 15 years ago. In each photograph, Emily was smiling, but her eyes seemed to follow Maya as she walked by. After what seemed like an eternity, the corridor ended abruptly at a junction where 3 different paths presented themselves. Maya stopped, disoriented, when she noticed a low, rhythmic sound coming from the path to the right, the unmistakable creaking of a swing being pushed. Following the sound, she found something that shouldn't be there. A perfect replica of the playground where Emily had played the day before she disappeared. On the central swing, a small figure moved back and forth, facing away from Maya. "Emily?" Maya called, her voice shaking. The figure on the swing stopped, but did not turn around. "You took too long," he said in the childish voice that Maya remembered perfectly. "I waited and waited." Maya took a step forward, then hesitated, remembering the message on her cell phone. "Never follow the child who smiles." Was this really Emily? Or was some creature from 7th Alum using her form to lure her? Before she could decide, a door opened loudly to her left, and Jen stumbled out, panting and with a superficial cut on her forehead. Upon seeing her, Maya ran toward her, relief momentarily overcoming caution. Jen, thank God you're okay. Define fine, Jen replied, trying to catch her breath. I just escaped from a laboratory where mathematical equations turned into things and tried to grab me. She looked around, noticing the motionless figure on the swing. Who is it? I think it's a version of Emily, Maya replied, keeping her voice low. But I don't trust her. Not here. The figure on the swing finally turned around, revealing Emily's face, or almost. His eyes were completely black, like wells of ink, and his smile was too wide for a child's face. You're right not to trust, said the creature, its voice wavering between that of a child and something much older. Nothing is trustworthy in Setalém, not even your own memories. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath his feet, and the playground scenery began to disintegrate like windblown sand. The creature wearing Emily's face remained intact as everything around it dissolved. He's coming, she announced, her smile never wavering. You guys should run now. Maya and Jen didn't need any further encouragement. They ran down the only remaining path, leaving behind the creature on the disappearing swing. The corridor they fled seemed to stretch and contract with each step, the walls breathing like a living organism. Lights flashed sporadically, revealing for fractions of a second distorted figures that moved along the walls, always out of sight. After a particularly sharp turn, they found Alex crouched next to a wall covered in strange symbols that he was obsessively filming with his camera. Hearing their footsteps, he turned, his face a mask of horrified fascination. You won't believe what I discovered, he said, pointing to the symbols. These are the same characters found in excavations in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. And here, he indicated a specific sequence. This roughly translates to the portal between worlds. This place is not new. It is ancient, older than humanity. Alex, we need to get out of here, Maya insisted, pulling him by the arm. There's something chasing us. As if summoned by his words, a muffled roar echoed through the hallway behind them, followed by a wet, viscous sound of something massive crawling quickly towards them. Alex finally seemed to awaken from his archaeological trance, putting away the camera and joining the two in their desperate escape. The hallway ended in a large metal door that opened automatically upon their approach, revealing something that made the three stop abruptly: an old elevator, with a manual pantograph grate instead of modern automatic doors. Inside, already waiting for them, was Eliza Keating, her face tense with urgency. Quickly, she ordered, holding the grate open. He's already realized what they're trying to do. With no time to question, the three rushed into the elevator. As soon as the grate closed behind them, the sound of pursuit became deafening. Something had reached the door and was now banging against it with enough force to deform the metal. The interior of the elevator was surprisingly different from the one that had brought them to Setalém. Instead of mirrors, the walls were dark wood carved with the same symbols Alex had filmed. The control panel did not show numbers, but strange symbols that glowed with their own light. This is not the original elevator, Eliza declared, answering the unasked question. But it can lead us to it if we choose the right symbol. Jen, always the most analytical, studied the panel intensely. How do we know which one is right? There are at least 20 different symbols here. Eliza smiled sadly. We don't know. Each one represents a different aspect of Setalém, a different level of this reality. Make the wrong choice, and we end up in a worse place than this. As they argued, the lights flickered violently, and for an instant the elevator was completely dark. When enlightenment returned, they were no longer alone. A fifth person was with them, the woman in the gray dress they had seen in the hallway. The shock froze everyone in place. This woman was identical to Eliza, down to the last detail of her gray dress and severe bun. Two identical Elizas, face to face, in an elevator between dimensions. As Maya began, her eyes moving between the two identical figures. Eliza, who was already with them in the elevator, stepped forward, facing her duplicate with an expression of regretful recognition. So that's how it goes, she said softly. I wondered when we would meet. The newcomer nodded. 50 years is a long time to resist complete transformation. Longer than anyone has managed. Maya felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized what was happening. "You are not Eliza," he said to the woman who had guided them there. "At least not completely." The first Eliza, or whatever her form was, smiled with genuine sadness. "Parts of me are still Eliza Keating. Other parts..." She hesitated, her eyes momentarily taking on the same abysmal blackness that characterized the Watchers. "Let's say I'm a version of Eliza who made a deal with Setalém a long time ago." "A deal?" Alex asked, instinctively raising his camera, even though he knew some things shouldn't be documented. "For every person who leaves, another must stay," the real Eliza explained, her voice weary with the weight of decades of existence in this impossible place. "I have helped many escape over the years, guiding them as I am guiding you now. But each escape has its price. You took their place," Jen concluded, horrifying realization reflected in her eyes. Repeatedly, the real Eliza nodded. "At first, it was a conscious sacrifice. Then," she looked at her duplicate, "Setalém started using my form, my voice to attract more victims. It became impossible to know when it was really me guiding someone and when it was her." The fake Eliza smiled, her eyes now completely black. "The building is a conscious entity, you know, older than human civilization. The Empire State Building was built on a site that was already a portal between realities. The architects didn't know, or maybe they knew exactly what they were doing." "What do you want from us?" demanded Maya, positioning herself protectively in front of her friends. "The same thing I always wanted," fake Eliza replied, her voice now reverberating with something inhuman. "Fresh minds, new emotions, memories to feed on, and specifically of you, Maya." She smiled, the gesture stretching beyond the limits of what a human face should allow. "I want the bond you share with your sister. It's so tasty." "Is Emily really here?" asked Maya, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain strong. Both Elizas simultaneously responded, "Yes," but while the real Eliza's eyes brimmed with compassion, the fake one's eyes shone with predatory malice. "She's here," continued the real Eliza, "but not as you remember her. 15 years in Setalém. No one stays human for that long." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. All these years, she had clung to the hope that somehow Emily was still alive somewhere. Now, faced with the possibility that her sister existed in some twisted, non-human form, Maya felt renewed grief for something she had irrevocably lost long ago. The elevator shook violently, the lights flickering as if the electricity itself was reacting to the tension inside the cabin. The fake Eliza smiled, her pitch-black eyes reflecting the flickering lights as she watched the group with an almost palpable predatory hunger. The real Eliza, visibly more fragile and human, stood firm in the face of her corrupted counterpart, a determination born of decades of resistance shining in her tired gaze. "We need to move," urged the real Eliza. "The longer we remain in this intermediate state, the easier it will be for Setalém to permanently arrest us." The metallic sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside the elevator suddenly echoed, quickly approaching. Maya, Alex, and Jen exchanged panicked looks, instinctively retreating to the back of the cabin. The elevator door shook as if something powerful was forcing it from the other side. "It's coming," crooned the fake Eliza, her inhuman smile widening even further. "And you're not alone this time." With a deafening crash, the hallway door was ripped off its hinges. On the threshold stood Lucas, panting and his face stained with tears, an expression of absolute terror distorting his features. Behind him, partially visible in the shadows of the corridor, a tall figure in a security uniform walked forward with deliberately slow steps, like a predator confident that its prey has no escape. "Luke!" shouted Maya, reaching out to him. Without hesitation, Lucas jumped into the elevator, almost collapsing in Maya's arms. "He's right behind me," he gasped, looking back in panic. "My uncle, or what used to be my uncle." The figure in the uniform stopped exactly at the elevator entrance. the red light from the hallway partially illuminating his face, a perfect replica of Mike Sullivan, except for the completely black eyes and the inhumanly wide smile. Beside him, another familiar figure appeared that made everyone's blood run cold. Danny, or something using her form, with the same abysmal blackness where her expressive eyes should have been. "Danny," Jen whispered, taking an involuntary step forward. Lucas held his arm tightly. "It's not her," he warned, his voice cracking with pain. She's gone. They got her." The fake Eliza slid to the side of the door, next to the two new entities, as if they formed a cohesive unit. "Lucas is right," he confirmed, his tone falsely compassionate. "Your friend broke one of the cardinal rules and is now in transition, like Lucas's uncle 3 months ago. Like so many others before them, the real Eliza positioned herself protectively between the group and the entities blocking the exit. You don't need them all," he declared firmly. "You already have me, you have the girl, let the others go." The creature wearing Mike Sullivan's face stepped into the elevator, making everyone step back. "That's not how it works, Eliza, and you know that better than anyone." His voice was a near-perfect imitation of a human, except for a metallic undertone that reverberated unnaturally. "For every person who leaves, another must stay. Balance." "What happened to my uncle?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound strong. The truth, Mike, or the entity that wore his form, smiled with grotesque gentleness. "The truth? Your uncle found the elevator by accident, a routine maintenance call on the 10th floor. When the doors opened, he saw possibilities." The creature paused, savoring everyone's attention. "Setalém showed him wealth, power, everything he secretly desired. The price? Bringing others to take his place." "Did he agree?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a horrified whisper. "Not right away," replied the creature, its black eyes fixed on Lucas. "But everyone eventually agrees. The alternative is complete absorption, becoming part of the fabric of Setalém forever. Mike made a deal. He would provide regular new visitors, and in return, he would receive rewards in the real world. Inexplicable promotions, money mysteriously appearing in their accounts. And he chose his own nephew as a sacrifice," the false Eliza finished, her tone almost admiring. "The blood bond makes everything more potent." Lucas staggered as if he had received a physical blow, leaning on the elevator wall to keep from falling. The betrayal was too much to process. His own uncle, the person he admired most, had deliberately drawn him and his friends into this nightmare. It wasn't entirely his choice, the real Eliza interjected, her voice gentle despite the desperate situation. "The longer you spend here, the less yourself you become. Parts of your humanity erode away, layer by layer, until the decisions you make are no longer truly yours." "So poetic, Eliza," mocked the fake Danny, speaking for the first time, her voice an imperfect imitation that occasionally slipped into inhuman tones. Always trying to find excuses for human weakness. The real Eliza ignored the taunt, turning back to the group. "There is a way out," he said urgently. "The original elevator can take them back, but they need to find it, and they need—" She hesitated, her eyes momentarily clouded with sadness. "They need to decide who stays." Lucas reached into his pocket, pulling out the old key he had found after Danny's disappearance. "Is this what we're looking for? The key to the original elevator?" The real Eliza's eyes widened in recognition. "Yes. How did you—" "It appeared in my pocket after Danny." Lucas couldn't finish the sentence. The expressions of the three Setalém entities changed simultaneously, a ripple of alarm crossing their inhumanly synchronized faces. The fake Eliza reached toward the key, her arm lengthening impossibly. "Don't. You realize what's happening?" hissed the creature, all pretense of humanity abandoned, its voice now a cacophony of discordant tones. "They are being manipulated, led like cattle to the slaughterhouse." "By whom?" Maya challenged, positioning herself next to Lucas, protecting the key. "For Emily," replied the real Eliza, her eyes fixed on Maya's. "Your sister is no longer as you remember, Maya. After 15 years here, she has become something between human and watcher, neither completely corrupted nor truly human anymore. She exists in an in-between state, moving between the levels of seventh beyond, collecting lost souls. She's trying to escape," the fake Mike added, his tone wavering between anger and something close to fear. "And for that, you need a replacement, or more than one." The revelation hit Maya like an icy wave. Emily was alive in some form but transformed by her time in Setalém. And now, he was apparently orchestrating Maya's rescue while simultaneously planning his own escape, potentially at the expense of one of his friends. "Don't believe them, Maya," warned the real Eliza. "Seventh Beyond distorts everything, especially the truth. Your sister may be changed, but I don't think she wants to harm you." A violent tremor shook the elevator, interrupting the conversation. The lights flickered, and for a moment reality seemed to fold in on itself. Through the elevator walls, briefly transparent, Maya glimpsed impossible corridors stretching in all directions, populated by distorted figures that moved as if in a collective nightmare. "We don't have any more time," declared the real Eliza. "You guys need to find the original elevator now." With a surprisingly agile movement for her apparent age, Eliza pushed the fake Danny out of the elevator, momentarily creating an opening. "When I say so, press the symbol that looks like a downward spiral," he quickly instructed. "And remember, for everyone that leaves, one must stay." Before anyone could react, Eliza launched herself at her corrupted counterparts, pushing them into the hallway. "Now!" he shouted, as he fought to keep the creatures away from the elevator entrance. Jen reacted first, pressing the indicated symbol. The doors began to slowly close, the pantograph grill sliding in slow motion. The last vision they saw of the hallway was of Eliza, the real Eliza, being dragged into the shadows by her twisted counterparts, her face serene despite the horror of her fate. The elevator began to spiral downward, not in free fall, but in an impossible trajectory that seemed to contort the laws of physics themselves. As they descended into the unknown, Lucas glanced at the others, the ancient key glowing ominously in his hand. "The key to our escape," he murmured. "But at what price?" The elevator descended in a dizzying spiral that defied human comprehension, moving not only downward, but apparently also sideways through imperceptible dimensions. The sound around them changed from a metallic grinding to something organic, a rhythmic pulsing that unsettlingly resembled a giant heartbeat. The cabin's once solid walls occasionally became translucent, revealing glimpses of overlapping realities, empty corridors that stretched endlessly, rooms filled with impossible objects and spaces where geometry itself seemed broken. "We're inside Setalém's circulatory system," Jen noted, her clinical tone a desperate attempt to maintain sanity in the face of the incomprehensible. "The building really is a living entity." Maya kept her eyes fixed on the key in Lucas's hand, as if that small metallic object was the only anchor in a universe that dissolved all certainties. "Eliza sacrificed herself for us," he whispered, "just like Danny." "Does this mean two of us can escape now?" Alex asked, his voice shaking as he tried to formulate the macabre mathematics of the situation. "Two sacrifices, two escapes?" Lucas closed his fingers tightly over the key. "I don't think it's that simple. Remember what fake Eliza said about Emily. She's trying to escape too. If we add her to the equation..." The elevator slowed abruptly, stabilizing itself before coming to a complete stop. The doors opened not into a hallway, but into a wide space that looked like a grotesquely distorted version of the lobby of the 1930s Empire State Building. Corrupted Art Deco, with angles that hurt the eyes and proportions that made nausea. The space was completely empty of other entities, but they instinctively felt that they were being watched. "Don't get out of the elevator yet," Maya warned, remembering one of the rules they had learned. A childish voice, horribly familiar, echoed through the empty lobby. "Too late to follow rules, Maya. You've already broken so many." The words reverberated from all directions simultaneously, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. "Emily?" called Maya, her eyes desperately scanning the empty space. "What's left of her?" replied the voice, now coming from behind them. Turning slowly, the group found a figure standing in the elevator with them, an 8-year-old girl wearing a faded green dress just like Emily on the day of her disappearance. At first glance, he looked perfectly normal, but as they looked more closely, they noticed subtle anomalies. His skin had a slightly translucent quality, like thin parchment. Her movements were too fluid, as if she were not completely subject to gravity, and his eyes were ancient, containing knowledge and pain that no child should possess. "Emily," Maya whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. A part of her wanted to run and hug her lost sister, while another part instinctively recoiled from the wrongness emanating from the child. The creature that had been Emily smiled, a gesture that contained genuine affection, but also something predatory. "You've grown, Maya, I haven't." "What happened to you?" asked Maya, her voice breaking with emotion. "Seventh beyond happened," Emily replied simply. "Or maybe I happened to see Setalém. After so long, it's hard to tell." She took a step forward and everyone instinctively stepped back. "Don't be afraid. If I wanted to harm you, I would have done it already. Don't you realize? I orchestrated all of this." "Did you bring us here?" Lucas asked, disbelief and horror mixing in his voice. Emily nodded, her movement slightly disjointed, like a marionette with loose strings. The legend of the elevator, the forum posts, the clues left for Maya, everything was carefully planned. She looked directly at Lucas. "Even your uncle was just a pawn in a bigger game. He found the elevator because I wanted him to." "Why?" demanded Maya, an anger born of betrayal beginning to overcome her shock. "Why draw us into this nightmare?" "To escape, of course," replied Emily with the cruel simplicity of a child. "I've been trapped here for 15 years, Maya. Not human, not completely absorbed, existing in an in-between state, neither alive nor dead. I want to get out. And to do that," she paused meaningfully, "I need replacements." The elevator shook slightly and the lights flickered. Emily looked up as if she could see through the elevator ceiling to something beyond. "We don't have much time. Setalém is realizing what we're trying to do. We need to move." Without waiting for a response, Emily floated. Not walked, but literally floated out of the elevator, toward a fire escape in the corner of the distorted lobby that none of them had noticed before. "This way," he called, his voice echoing unnaturally. The original elevator is below in the heart of Setalém. Exchanging looks of uncertainty and fear, but with no apparent alternatives, the group followed the spectral child. The fire escape looked like nothing that might exist in a normal building. The steps occasionally changed position as they descended, and the surrounding walls pulsed like living tissue. Each landing between floors offered a different personalized view for each member of the group. On the first landing, Maya found a perfect replica of Emily's room on the night of her disappearance. The bed perfectly made, the toys organized, the window slightly open as it had been on that fateful night. A ghostly figure of 8-year-old Maya sat on the edge of the bed, whispering repeatedly, "My fault, my fault, my fault." On the second landing, Alex found himself on a macabre film set where cameras with human eyes rotated to focus on him. A distorted version of himself occupied the director's chair, shouting, "Film everything! Don't stop filming no matter what!" While dark entities were tortured on camera for their definitive documentary, Jen found herself surrounded by mathematical equations that pulsed through the walls like veins, forming patterns that almost made sense before dissolving into chaos again. The numbers whispered to her, promising that if she just stayed a little longer, she would finally understand the secrets of the universe. The final answer to all the questions her skepticism had never managed to answer. For Lucas, the horror was more personal, a perfect replica of his uncle's apartment, where meticulously kept diaries revealed the terrible truth. Mike Sullivan had been recruited by Setalém decades earlier, long before Lucas was born. The apartment contained photographs of dozens of previous victims that Mike had lured to the building over the years, their faces blurred except for their eyes, which seemed to follow Lucas as he walked by. When they finally gathered at the final landing, each was visibly shaken by their personalized experience. Emily waited for them, her body now wavering between solidity and transparency, like a jammed transmission. "Setalém knows your greatest fears and desires," she explained, her voice alternating between that of a child and something much older. "Use them to destabilize your mind, to make them more digestible. Like ice cream," muttered Jen hysterically. "Soften before consuming." Emily smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her old eyes. "Precisely. Now what comes next is the hardest. The original elevator is just ahead, but to reach it, we need to go through the antechamber." "What is the antechamber?" Alex asked, his camera now firmly off and put away as if he had finally found something he didn't want to document. "It's the point where your world and hereafter meet," Emily replied. "An in-between space where the rules of both realities partially apply. It's disorienting." She pushed open the final door, revealing what appeared to be the main lobby of the Empire State Building, but a slightly wrong version. The proportions were subtly distorted, the colors were too saturated, and the people walking through the space had blurred faces, like out-of-focus photographs. The clocks on the walls turned counterclockwise, and objects occasionally floated, defying gravity before suddenly falling. "The antechamber," Emily announced. "We're almost at the exit." In the center of the distorted lobby, a single elevator stood out. Ancient, decorated with authentic Art Deco from the Empire State Building's original construction period. Its golden door glowed with a light that seemed to emanate from the metal itself. "The original elevator," Emily whispered, reverent respect in her voice. "The first connection between the worlds, created when the land was dedicated for construction. Long before the building existed, this portal was already here." "How does it work?" asked Maya, cautiously approaching the shiny elevator. Emily looked at Lucas, who was still holding the old key tightly. "The key opens the way, but as Eliza explained, for every person who leaves, another must stay. A balance must be maintained." "But Danny already stayed," Jen argued desperately. "And Eliza." Emily shook her head slowly. "Danny and Eliza purchased time, not ticket. The rule is absolute. For each person who uses the original elevator to exit, a replacement must be volunteered." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implication of Emily's words set in. Someone would have to stay. "Who goes first?" asked Emily, her childish voice contrasting cruelly with the sentence she'd just spoken. Visceral tension filled the air of the antechamber as the four remaining friends processed the cruel mathematics of their situation. The original elevator stood before them, its golden door pulsing subtly as if it were breathing, inviting and threatening simultaneously. The blurry figures that roamed the distorted lobby seemed to slowly converge towards him, maintaining a measured distance, like predators surrounding injured prey. "Let's reason logically," Jen proposed, her voice betraying the tremor of someone trying to apply rationality to a fundamentally irrational situation. "If it's true that for every person who leaves, one must stay, and if both Danny and Eliza just bought time, as Emily says." She hesitated, looking at Emily with growing suspicion. "Then we need to decide on an order. Who leaves first, then who, and who stays forever," Lucas added darkly, his fingers gripping the ancient key so hard his knuckles turned white. His gaze alternated between Maya and the spectral figure that had once been Emily. "How do we know we can trust these rules?" "You?" He addressed the last question directly to the supernatural child. Emily smiled, a gesture that seemed rehearsed, as if she had forgotten how to smile naturally after 15 years in Setalém. "They can't know for sure, just like they can't know if I'm really Emily or just something using her form." She floated closer to Maya, who instinctively backed away. "But they don't have many alternatives, do they?" Maya studied the creature that claimed to be her sister, searching desperately for some sign of the Emily she had known, some confirmation that this spectral being truly contained the essence of the sister she had lost. "If you're really Emily, then tell me something only my sister would know." The child tilted his head at a slightly unnatural angle. "The night before I disappeared, you promised me that you would take me to see the stars on the roof of our building. On my next birthday, you said it would be our secret, that you wouldn't tell Mom because she would think it was dangerous." A sad smile crossed his face. "We never got around to going." Tears ran down Maya's face. It was true. A promise whispered between sisters that had never been fulfilled, something no one else could know. "We need to decide now," Emily insisted, her form wavering more intensely, moments of almost complete transparency alternating, with brief periods of solidity. "He's coming, the guardian of the gates. He senses when someone tries to escape." As if summoned by his words, a tremor ran through the floor of the antechamber. The blurry figures around them froze simultaneously, all turning their featureless faces in the same direction, towards a monumental door at the opposite end of the lobby that was slowly beginning to open. "Who goes first?" repeated Emily with increasing urgency. Alex, who had remained strangely silent throughout the entire argument, suddenly stepped forward. "I suggest Maya," he declared with surprising conviction. "She lost her sister to this place. She deserves to be the first to escape." Maya looked at him in surprise. "Alex." "No, he's right," Jen agreed quickly. "Maya should go first. Then you." "Lucas, you lost your uncle to this place, in a sense. Then me and Alex. It will be the last," Alex added, his tone unreadable. "It makes sense." Lucas reluctantly offered the key to Maya. "Then it's decided, but who?" He couldn't finish the impossible question. Who would stay forever? Maya picked up the key, its weight feeling much heavier than it should. "We can't just leave someone behind," he protested. "There must be another way." Emily shook her head slowly. "There is not. The balance must be maintained. It has always been this way." "What about you?" Maya asked suddenly. "You want to leave too, don't you? That means two of us would have to stay." Emily didn't respond directly, her gaze returning to the distant door that continued to open with agonizing slowness. A low, rising sound emanated from the opening, something between a roar and a wail that seemed to pierce straight into the mind. "There is no more time for debate," Emily urged. "Use the key now, Maya." With trembling fingers, Maya inserted the antique key into the original elevator's golden lock. The metal reacted to the contact, glowing brightly for a moment before turning. On its own in the lock, the door slid aside silently, revealing a surprisingly ordinary interior, a normal elevator cabin with mirrors and a simple panel showing just two buttons, up and down. "Come in," instructed Emily. "Press up to return to your world. When the time is right, we send the cabin back to the next one." Maya hesitated on the threshold, looking at her friends. "I promise I'll find a way to help you once I get up there," he vowed. "I'm not just going to abandon them." Lucas forced an encouraging smile, although his eyes revealed his fear. "We know that. Now go, before it's too late." Maya took a step toward the elevator, but before she could fully enter, Alex suddenly pushed her aside with surprising force. The movement was so unexpected that no one had time to react, as he jumped into the elevator, ripping the key from the lock in one fluid movement. "I'm sorry," he said, his face a mask of cold determination as he quickly pressed the P button. "But I don't plan on being stuck here forever." "Alex!" shouted Jen, running towards the door that was already starting to close. "What are you doing?" "What is necessary?" he replied, his eyes shining with a feverish intensity. For the first time, they noticed that he was still holding his camera tightly. Think about it. The first authentic documentary about a parallel dimension. "I'm going. To be legendary." "You damn selfish," shouted Lucas, trying to force the closing door. "Come back here." "One of you will have to stay anyway," Alex retorted, his tone now defensive. "What difference does it make who leaves first?" Before anyone could respond, the door closed completely, sealing Alex inside the elevator as it began to rise, taking him back to the real world, and abandoning his friends to the mercy of Setalém. Stunned silence fell over the remaining three as they processed the shocking betrayal. Maya was kneeling where she had fallen after Alex's push, her eyes fixed on the closed elevator door in disbelief. Jen was visibly shaking, alternating between anger and panic. Lucas repeatedly punched the now closed golden door, his angry screams gradually turning into muffled sobs. Emily watched everything with an unreadable expression, her form becoming more and more transparent. "Interesting," he finally commented, his voice distant. "He broke the voluntary pact that complicates things." "How complicated?" Jen demanded, turning to the entity claiming to be Emily. Before Emily could respond, the roar from the distant door intensified dramatically. The blurry figures around the lobby began to move erratically, like ants whose nest had been disturbed. "He's almost here," Emily warned, her form now almost completely transparent. "The Guardian has detected the unauthorized escape. He will seal all exit paths." She looked at Maya with what appeared to be genuine concern. "I'm sorry, Maya. I was hoping we could hang out together." "What's happening to you?" asked Maya, noticing the progressive dissolution of her sister's form. "My energy is running out," Emily explained. "I resisted complete absorption for so long. I kept parts of my humanity, of my memories of you, but each time I directly interfere with the workings of Setalém, I lose more of myself." She extended a translucent hand towards Maya, who could see through it. "I don't have much time before I completely merge with this place." With visible effort, Emily materialized a small object in her ghostly hand, an ancient key identical to the one Alex had taken. "Here," he said, handing it to Maya. "My last act of free will. Find the truth about me, about what really happened 15 years ago." Maya took the key, feeling it surprisingly solid and warm to the touch, contrasting with Emily's almost disembodied form. "What do you mean? What happened to you?" Emily smiled sadly before starting to fade like mist in the sunlight. "I wasn't the first child Setalém claimed, nor will I be the last. Look in the building's archives, 1931. The beginning." His voice became a whisper as his form dissolved completely. "Goodbye, Maya. A part of me will always love you." With those final words, Emily disappeared completely, leaving Maya, Lucas, and Jen alone in the increasingly chaotic antechamber. As the Guardian's presence drew inexorably closer, and the original elevator began its slow journey back to fetch them, now without Alex, and with a mysterious key that promised answers, but only generated more questions. With Emily's disappearance, a violent tremor shook the entire antechamber. The walls began to ooze a viscous black substance, like thick paint that gradually covered the surfaces. The blurred figures wandering through the distorted lobby simultaneously emitted a silent scream, their mouths opening at impossible angles as their bodies dissolved into shadows that dripped onto the floor. "What is happening?" screamed Jen, trying to keep her balance as the floor rippled beneath her feet, like the surface of a lake during a storm. "Setalém is reacting to Alex's escape," Lucas replied, holding Maya's arm so she wouldn't fall. "And Emily's disappearance. The building is reconfiguring itself." The lights flickered frantically before going out completely, plunging the trio into absolute darkness. When they turned on again seconds later, Maya realized with horror that she was alone. Jen and Lucas had disappeared, and she found herself in an entirely different hallway. "Lucas, Jen!" he shouted desperately, his voice echoing unnaturally in the new space. There was no response other than the distorted echo of her own voice, which gradually turned into a whisper that sounded disturbingly like Emily's childish voice. "Find the truth, Maya. Find the truth." The corridor where Maya found herself was unlike anything they had faced so far in Setalém. The walls, ceiling, and floor were entirely covered in mirrors, creating a labyrinth of infinite reflections that stretched in all directions. It was impossible to determine where the real corridor ended and where the reflections began, creating complete spatial disorientation. More disturbing, however, was that each mirror showed a different image of Maya. Not just her current reflection, but versions of her at different ages and points in her life. In a mirror, he saw himself at 5 years old, holding Emily's hand on her little sister's first day of school. In another, it was a teenager crying at the symbolic funeral held for Emily when the search was officially over. "What place is this?" Maya whispered to herself, cautiously advancing down the mirrored hallway. The answer came as a whisper that seemed to emanate from the mirrors themselves. The archive of memories, where Setalém stores everything it absorbs. Maya continued forward, unable to look away from the scenes from her own life displayed in the mirrors. Some were familiar: birthdays, graduations, moments of joy and sadness that she remembered perfectly. Others, however, seemed distorted or altered, as if Setalém had remixed his memories into new configurations. Then something caught her attention. A mirror that showed a scene that Maya didn't consciously recognize, but which awakened an unsettling feeling of déjà vu. In it, he saw himself as a 10-year-old child, watching his mother in the kitchen of their old house. Her mother spoke in a low voice to a man Maya had never seen before. Tall, in a dark suit, with a peculiar pin on his lapel that seemed to represent the Empire State Building. "It needs to be done," said the man in the reflection, his voice reaching Maya's ears as if he were actually present. "The building chose its youngest daughter. If not her, it will be the oldest. One of them needs to serve." Maya's mother cried silently but nodded in agreement. "When?" he asked simply. "Next week," the man replied. "A school trip. It will be quick. She won't feel any pain." Maya recoiled in horror, her heart hammering in her chest. "This can't be real," she muttered to herself. "It's a manipulation by Setalém. It has to be." But a part of her, a part she had suppressed for years, recognized the truth in the scene. Small details became clear. The mysterious man visiting several times. In the weeks before Emily disappeared. Late-night whispers. Your mother crying alone when she thought no one was watching. Maya continued through the mirror maze, each reflection revealing more fragments of the puzzle. In one, she saw her mother carefully placing a small Empire State Building pin in Emily's backpack on the morning of the school trip. In another, he saw the exact moment Emily separated herself from the group in the building's lobby. Not by accident, but subtly guided by a security guard whose face remained conveniently in the shadows. The next mirror showed a scene that made Maya stop, frozen in horror. Herself, at 8 years old, hidden behind an ornate column in the lobby of the Empire State Building. In the reflection, little Maya watched as Emily willingly entered an elevator with a shadowy figure, whose face was just a blur. Before the doors closed, Emily looked directly at where young Maya was hiding, a single tear running down her face as she silently formed with her lips, "Don't forget me." "I was there," Maya whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "I saw it happen. How could I forget?" "You haven't forgotten," replied a voice behind her. Eliza Keating's voice, although when Maya turned around, she only saw a mirror where Eliza's reflection appeared, even without her being physically present in the hallway. "Your brain protected you from the truth. Trauma does that. It encapsulates memories that are too painful to process." "Eliza, how did you... I thought you were captured by the creatures." Eliza's reflection smiled sadly. "I was. Most of me has already been absorbed by Setalém. This is just a fragment, an echo preserved in the archive of memories." She gestured to the surrounding mirrors. "This place contains all the memories Setalém has ever absorbed. Of its victims, its witnesses, even the building itself. My mother..." Maya could barely articulate the question. Did she know? Did she allow it? "It's complicated," replied Eliza's reflection. The Empire State Building was not built by accident in that specific location. Since colonial times, there had been reports of unexplained disappearances in that area. Native Americans avoided the site, calling it a crossing point between worlds. When the building was built in 1931, It channeled and amplified what was already there. But what does this have to do with my family? With Emily? Some families have an affinity with Setalém, a sensitivity to the supernatural that makes their members more compatible as anchors between dimensions. Your family has that lineage. Your mother knew this because your grandmother also disappeared under mysterious circumstances in the Empire State Building decades earlier. Maya felt her legs weaken under the weight of these revelations. So it was all planned? Emily was sacrificed? Not exactly sacrificed, Eliza corrected. More like delivered. There are people, humans, who serve as intermediaries for Setalém. They identify families with the necessary affinity, negotiate, prepare the ground. Some do it for material gain, others for promises of forbidden knowledge or protection for the rest of the family. Protection, Maya repeated, a horrible realization taking shape. Was Emily taken to protect me? Was it me or her? Eliza's reflection nodded solemnly. Your mother made an impossible choice. One daughter to save another. The rules of Setalém required a child of the bloodline, but allowed choice. Maya felt sick at the revelation, her legs finally giving out as she fell to her knees on the mirrored floor. The entire hallway seemed to revolve around him, every surface reflecting fragments of the terrible truth that had remained hidden for 15 years. Why am I seeing this now? He asked finally, his voice breaking. Why did Emily want me to find out about this? Because knowledge is power in Setalém, replied Eliza, and power is what you need to escape. His reflection began to fade, becoming more and more transparent. Emily resisted complete absorption for so long because she had a purpose, to find a way to break the cycle, to expose the truth, the key she gave her. Maya took the antique key that Emily had materialized before disappearing, holding it up for Eliza to see. This isn't just a key to the original elevator, Eliza explained, her image now almost completely dispelled. It's the key to the physical archives in the basement of the Empire State Building. Documents going back to 1931, detailing every disappearance, every affected family, names, dates, evidence. Evidence of what, exactly? That seventh alum isn't just a random supernatural phenomenon, Eliza replied, her last words barely audible as her reflection disappeared completely. It is managed, cultivated, protected by people in positions of power who benefit from the arrangement, people who need to be exposed if the cycle of disappearances is ever to be stopped. When Eliza's image disappeared completely, Maya remained. Kneeling in the hall of mirrors, the key clutched tightly in her hand, and a new determination growing in her chest. If she escaped, it wouldn't just be to save herself or her remaining friends. It would be to expose a conspiracy that spanned generations, to give meaning to the sacrifice of Emily and so many others. With effort, he stood up and continued, moving through the maze of memories, each reflection now illuminating not just his personal past, but pieces of a puzzle far larger and more sinister than he had ever imagined. Somewhere in this maze, I knew I would find my way back to Lucas and Jen, and together they would find not just a way out of Setalém, but the truth that Emily had held back for so long. Maya emerged from the maze of mirrors through a door that hadn't existed moments before, finding herself in a vast, grand space that made her heart skip a beat. It was a perfect replica of the Empire State Building's 1930s ballroom, Art Deco, in its heyday, with polished marble, gleaming brass, and gold accents that sparkled in the light of suspended crystal chandeliers. The space was filled with dozens of ghostly figures in formal costumes of the time, dancing in perfect synchronization to the sound of a spectral orchestra playing a melancholic waltz. There was something deeply disturbing about the scene. The dancers had no faces, just empty, hazy spaces above their starched collars and pearl necklaces. Maya! Turning toward the familiar voice, Maya saw Jen and Lucas running toward her from the opposite side of the room. I had never felt so much relief at seeing familiar faces. They found themselves in the middle of the ballroom, hugging each other desperately like shipwrecked people clinging to each other in the middle of a storm. I thought I lost you, Maya whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Us too, Lucas replied, his face etched with new lines of tension and exhaustion. After the floor collapsed, I ended up in some kind of archive, full of documents about disappearances going back centuries. And I ended up in a control room, Jen added, her eyes revealing the horror of what she had witnessed. Monitors showing every hallway, every room in Setalém. People trapped here for decades, reliving their worst fears in endless cycles. It's like an emotion farm. The three remained close together, as the ghostly dancers continued their eternal waltz around them, occasionally passing through them like icy mist. The ballroom seemed to exist in its own pocket of reality within Setalém, more stable, less threatening, but imbued with a deep melancholy that hung over them like a damp cloak. I found out things about Emily, Maya said finally, her voice low, about how she really disappeared. It was no accident. She was given to this place by our own mother. Maya quickly shared the revelations from the Hall of Mirrors, each word more painful than the last. Lucas and Jen listened in horrified silence, occasionally clasping their hands in silent support. Families with a special affinity for Setalém, murmured Jen when Maya finished. That would explain why your uncle was chosen as well, Lucas. Perhaps there is some kind of genetic predisposition that makes certain bloodlines more compatible with this place. Lucas nodded slowly, his face a mask of bitter resignation. There's something I didn't tell you, he confessed, avoiding their eyes. Something I discovered in the archives while we were apart. Maya and Jen waited in tense silence as Lucas gathered the courage to continue. My uncle wasn't a victim, not completely, he said finally. He knew about Setalém long before he accidentally found the elevator. In fact, he was part of a group that has served this place for generations. What? Maya exclaimed, instinctively stepping back. A secret society, Lucas explained, shame evident in his voice. Empire State Building employees, security guards, administrators, people in strategic positions who identify potential visitors to Setalém. They thrive on the benefits, inexplicable wealth, quick promotions, increased longevity, all in exchange for providing new food for this place. Your uncle knew this when he invited us to test the elevator, Jen concluded, horrified realization written all over her face. He deliberately used us as bait. Lucas couldn't respond. He just nodded miserably, tears of shame running down his cheeks. And you? Maya asked, her voice shaking slightly. How much did you know, Lucas? Nothing, I swear to God, he replied quickly, meeting her eyes for the first time. At least, not consciously. But I think some part of me always felt there was something wrong with those Uncle Mike stories about the building, something dangerous about my family's fascination with this place for generations. While they were talking, they didn't notice that the music had stopped. The dancers were now motionless, all facing simultaneously towards the center of the lobby, where something had appeared. An ancient elevator, unlike any they had seen so far in Setalém. It was a 1930s elevator car with an elaborate structure of brass and carved dark wood, its swinging door open like a silent invitation. The original elevator, Maya whispered, instantly recognizing it from Eliza and Emily's descriptions. As if moved by an invisible force, the three cautiously approached the elevator. Maya removed the antique key that Emily had given her, noticing with surprise that it seemed to subtly vibrate in her hand, as if recognizing its proximity to the lock for which it had been forged. Eliza's key, Jen murmured in acknowledgement. The lock was positioned next to the open door, an ancient brass structure that seemed to pulse in the amber light of the lobby. When Maya inserted the key, it fit perfectly, turning on its own with a soft click that echoed through the silent room. The interior of the elevator lit up, revealing a cabin much larger inside than it appeared from the outside, another spatial impossibility typical of Setalém. The walls inside were not mirrored, but covered in photographs, hundreds of them layered, showing faces from every era from the 1930s to the present. It's every person who's ever been trapped here, Jen realized, moving closer to examine the images. Maya felt her heart freeze as her eyes found a specific photograph next to the control panel. A yellowed image from 1974 showing two smiling young women in front of the Empire State Building. One of them was unmistakably a young Eliza Keating. Beside him, with her arm around his shoulders, was Emily. Not the 8-year-old Emily who had disappeared, but a teenage Emily, maybe 16 or 17, smiling at the camera as if she weren't trapped in a dimensional nightmare. "How is it possible?" Maya whispered, touching the photograph with trembling fingers. Emily was only 8 years old when she disappeared. "Time doesn't work normally in Setalém," Lucas recalled, looking over his shoulder. Eliza mentioned that. Maybe Emily grew up here, at least partially, before being completely absorbed. Or maybe Setalém is playing with our minds again, suggested Jen, ever the skeptic, though her tone revealed that even she was shaken by the evidence before them. Maya continued examining the photograph, noticing details she had initially missed. The Empire State Building pin on Emily's lapel, identical to the one the mysterious man wore in Maya's recovered memory. Emily's eyes, which looked much older and more knowledgeable than her young face suggested. And most disturbingly, the date stamped in the corner of the photo, October 17th, 1974, exactly 50 years to the night they had made their pact to visit the Empire State Building on Halloween. It wasn't a coincidence, Maya suddenly realized. None of that was. Emily was manipulating us through time, leaving clues, creating connections. She planned all of this decades before I was even born. A sudden tremor shook the ballroom, making the chandeliers tinkle above them. The ghostly dancers began to dissolve like smoke carried by the wind. A distant but growing roar reverberated through the walls, making the floor vibrate beneath their feet. "It's the Guardian," Lucas warned, looking around nervously. "He's coming. We need to decide now." It was then that they noticed a crucial detail about the original elevator. Its interior, although spacious to accommodate the hundreds of photographs, only had 2 seats fixed to the wall opposite the control panel. 2 seats for 3 people. "No," Jen whispered, horrifying realization setting in. "One of us has to stay." The shaking intensified, and the sound of something massive approaching echoed through the lobby, getting louder and louder. The lights began to flicker, and the walls of the ballroom shook as if the entire structure of Setalém was destabilizing. "The door is closing," warned Lucas, pointing to the pantograph grill that was beginning to slide slowly, moved by some invisible force. The 3 friends looked at each other, the crushing weight of the impossible decision hanging between them like a physical presence. Who would be left behind? Who would be condemned to an eternity in Setalém so that the others could escape? Maya looked back at the photograph of Emily and Eliza, her heart heavy with the realization of everything her sister had endured and planned. Tears streamed freely down her face as she considered what Emily would have wanted her to do. The elevator door continued to close inexorably as the Guardian's roar approached, and the final choice was forced upon the 3 survivors. The Guardian's roar intensified until it became deafening, the walls of the ballroom shaking violently as cracks spread across the marble floor. The elevator door continued to close slowly, as if time itself was being stretched to prolong the moment of impossible decision. "We all have to go together," Maya insisted, grabbing Jen and Lucas's hands. "There must be another way." Jen looked at the 2 seats in the elevator, then at the closing door, and something in her face changed. A calm determination replacing the fear. "Maya," she said with surprising clarity amid the growing chaos, "your sister waited for you. For 15 years. Lucas lost his uncle and Danny to this place. You both have a responsibility to expose the truth." Before Maya could protest, Jen looked beyond them, her eyes widening. "He's here." At the opposite end of the hall, a colossal figure emerged from the shadows, an entity that seemed composed of all the stolen memories and emotions devoured over decades, its form constantly shifting between distorted human silhouettes, its countless eyes glowing with ancient hunger. "They go," shouted Jen suddenly, pushing Maya and Lucas with surprising force into the elevator, just as the door was about to close completely. "Jen, no!" shouted Maya, falling backwards into the cabin. She tried to stand up, reaching through the narrow opening that remained, her fingers briefly brushing Jen's before the door closed with a final click. The last glimpse Maya had of her friend was of Jen turning to face the Guardian, her arms open as if embracing her destiny. A sad but determined smile on her face. The door closed completely, sealing Maya and Lucas inside the original elevator, as Maya's desperate scream echoed in the confined space. "Jen!" The elevator began to move, not going up as expected, but descending at an increasing speed. The photographs on the walls inside seemed to move, faces contorting into expressions that alternated between joy, terror, and resignation. Maya and Lucas clung to the seats and each other as the cabin accelerated, the sensation of free fall intensifying until it felt like they were plummeting through time and space itself. As abruptly as it began, the fall ended. The elevator stopped, with a gentle jolt, as if it had landed on a cushion of air. The lights blinked once, twice, then steadied. The swinging door slid smoothly to the side, revealing not the spectral ballroom, not another impossible Setalém corridor, but the normal, silent lobby of the Empire State Building. Hesitantly, barely believing, Maya and Lucas exited the elevator. The lobby was deserted. Not supernaturally so, but in the mundane way of an office building in the early hours of the morning. A clock on the wall showed 4:17 in the morning. "We achieved," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. "Are we really back?" Maya touched a nearby marble column, feeling its cool, regal solidity beneath her fingers. "It seems so," she replied, although a lingering feeling that something was fundamentally wrong still hung over her. A sleepy security guard at the main reception looked up at them, frowning in confusion. "Hey, you two, the building doesn't open to visitors until 8 a.m. How did you get in here?" The normalcy of the interaction was almost surreal after everything they had experienced. Maya and Lucas looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. No one would believe the truth. "Sorry, sir," Lucas replied, his voice surprisingly firm. "We were at the Halloween party last night, and I think we fell asleep somewhere. We're leaving now." The guard mumbled something about irresponsible youth, but waved them toward the exit. As they walked, Maya noticed that they were wearing exactly the same clothes as when they entered the cursed elevator, but now stained, torn, and dirty, as if they had passed an arduous test of survival, which, in fact, they had. As they walked out through the revolving doors onto silent Fifth Avenue, Maya took her phone out of her pocket with trembling fingers. The screen lit up, revealing the date, November 1st, 4:23 a.m. Exactly 24 hours had passed since they got on the elevator to Setalém. "A whole day," she murmured. "It seemed an eternity," Lucas added, looking around at the city that had continued to exist normally while they fought for their lives in a parallel dimension. Dawn was beginning to dye the Manhattan sky with pale shades of pink and orange when they noticed something unusual on the sidewalk ahead. A local news van parked, with a reporter fixing his hair as a camera was readied. Beside the reporter, gesturing excitedly as he spoke, was a familiar figure that made Maya and Lucas's blood freeze in their veins. "Alex, I don't believe it," Lucas whispered, anger rising in his throat. "Is this son of a bitch giving an interview?" They approached silently, getting close enough to hear Alex's voice. "Completely devastated by the mysterious disappearance of my 3 friends. We went into the Empire State Building last night for a Halloween adventure, and I only went to the bathroom for a few minutes. When I came back, they were just gone." His voice shook with perfectly calculated emotion. "The police are investigating, but there are no leads. It's as if they disappeared into thin air." Maya felt a wave of nausea as she realized that Alex had constructed a story to cover up his selfish escape, presenting himself as the anguished victim rather than the traitor he was. "Alex," she called, her voice cutting through the morning air like a razor. Alex turned, and the transformation on his face was instant and revealing. First, absolute shock, as if he were seeing ghosts, followed by a brief moment of pure terror. before he managed to compose his expression into a mask of surprised joy. "Maya, Lucas," he exclaimed, running towards them with his arms open for a hug that neither of them returned. "You're alive. It's a miracle. Where have you been?" The reporter and cameraman quickly approached, sensing an unexpected twist in the story. "Are your friends missing?" asked the reporter, pushing a microphone toward Maya. "What happened to you guys? Where's the third person?" Maya ignored the reporter, her eyes fixed on Alex. "Why did you abandon us?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You knew what would happen if you ran away alone." Alex's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes darting nervously between Maya, Lucas, and the camera now pointed at them all. I don't know what you're talking about, Maya. You three disappeared. I looked everywhere." "Liar," Lucas growled, taking a step forward. "You betrayed us. You left Jen behind." Something strange happened then. For a brief moment, the morning light seemed to hit Alex from an impossible angle, and Maya could have sworn she saw his eyes turn completely black before returning to normal in the blink of an eye. "I think you're confused," Alex said, forcing a laugh for the camera's benefit. "Probably stressed from whatever they've been through. We need to get them to a hospital, make sure they're okay." Maya stepped back, suddenly aware that they couldn't tell the truth. Not here, not with cameras rolling and an audience that would never believe them. "Let's go, Lucas," he murmured, pulling him by the arm. As they walked away, Alex called after them, his voice carrying an undertone only they would understand. "You guys can't run away from this, you know. What happened there doesn't just stay there." Hours later, Maya sat alone in her apartment, exhausted beyond comprehension but unable to sleep. After separating from Lucas, who had insisted on walking her home but needed to check on his own family, she had taken a long, hot shower, as if she could somehow wash the memories of Setalém from her skin. The television hummed softly in the background, a local news anchor commenting on the mysterious story of the young people who had disappeared and inexplicably reappeared in the Empire State Building. The camera cut to the earlier recorded interview with Alex, now introduced as the relieved friend who had tirelessly searched for his missing comrades. Maya was about to turn off the TV when something in the footage caught her attention, a detail she hadn't noticed during the actual confrontation. As Alex spoke to the camera, he briefly turned his back, passing in front of a mirrored storefront window behind him. For a split second, so fast that Maya almost doubted what she saw, her reflection didn't follow the movement. While the real Alex turned his back to the camera, his reflection remained forward, looking straight into the lens with a smile too wide to be human. "My God," Maya whispered, freezing the frame with the remote and moving closer to the screen. There was no doubt, Alex's reflection was completely out of sync with his physical body. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, startling her. The screen lit up with a message notification. The number was unknown, but the contents made Maya's blood run cold in her veins. "They won't let us out completely. Part of us always stays. Part of them always comes back. Look at the reflections, they're coming." Underneath the message was a single initial, J. "Jen?" Maya whispered, her hands shaking as she typed a response. "Jen, is that you? Where are you?" The answer came almost instantly. "In the hallway, always in the hallway. They allowed me this contact as part of the deal. Be careful with Alex. He brought something with him. Watch your own reflections too. You need to find the files, Maya. The key." Maya looked at the old key she still carried, placed carefully on the table next to her phone. In its brass glow for a brief moment, she could have sworn she saw a face reflected, not her own, but Emily's, smiling sadly. When he looked up to check the message again, he noticed something disturbing, his own reflection in the dark screen of his cell phone. As she stared in growing horror, the reflection smiled independently of her, a smile that extended beyond the limits of what a human face should allow. A sound of movement behind her made Maya turn sharply. Lucas was standing at the entrance to the room, having used the spare key she had given him years ago. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the television where the frozen image of Alex's anomalous reflection still glowed. "You saw it too," he said, not as a question. Maya nodded slowly, lifting her phone to show Jen's message. "It's not over, Lucas. Somehow, Jen is still communicating with us, and she says we need to be careful with—" His words died in his throat when he noticed something besides Lucas, his reflection in the foyer mirror. While the real Lucas remained motionless, staring at the TV, his reflection slowly moved his hand to his pocket, removing a key identical to the one Maya had placed. On the table, the key to the original elevator. The reflection's eyes met Maya's through the mirror, and he smiled, a smile that didn't belong on Lucas's face, a smile that Maya recognized from the endless corridors of Setalém. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't look back. But I think we brought something with us." The phone vibrated again in her hand with a final message from Jen. "We never actually left Setalém, Maya. We just found another one of its many rooms." Outside the apartment window, the lights of the Empire State Building shone against the Manhattan night sky, steady, watchful, inviting to those who didn't know its secret. Maya felt the weight of the ancient key in her hand, a promise of answers and a threat of new horrors. As she watched, the building's lights blinked 5 times in succession, as if acknowledging her vigil, as if calling her back. Somewhere between the 10th and 12th floors, an elevator waited.